speak. We've heard a little bit today about regulation. I'm coming at it from a different perspective, from a commercial investment perspective and trade perspective. And so what I mean by that is that my background, just to give you a little bit more about that, is I spent over a decade in government in Australia. So I've looked at these issues from drafting law, advising ministers, developing the policy behind the law, and looking at the triple bottom line benefits to government and why something like this is needed, right? And if we have a look at what's going on around the world, I don't think, and I can only question myself coming from Australia, and I notice my Singaporean counterpart over here, where I spend a lot of time, they seem to have the policy development well advanced, and Australia appears to be looking at what's going on in other countries. I'll talk more about that later on. But what I'm actually going to jump to, I'm going to actually turn this upside down a little bit. And while I'm not showing it up there, I'm speaking from some notes. But what's the pathway forward? And I'm going to bring that to the forefront of what we're talking about. What is a pathway forward? And for you technologists, professors of law, regulators that might be out there, I'm looking at it through the lens of what I just introduced myself about, is that what I think we need to do is better prepare that information for government, right? Why? Because industry out there wants certainty, right? With legal certainty, there's investment. With legal certainty, there's trade. We all know that. So in order to get that, we need to develop that policy proposal, and I call it a use case from where I come from, a regulatory policy paper in the form of a white paper that informs government about the triple bottom line. And what is the triple bottom line? The social, economic and environmental benefits of what we're all doing here. So I think that that's some of the message that needs to get out there in order for governments to take more note of what we're doing. That's the first element. The second element, and this is the area where I specialise in because I look at cross-border legal issues. So my specialised area of the law is cross-border law in a transnational context, looking at the gaps in the law between nation states, right, which is highly complex. And why I say that is we need to engage not only national but regional and international institutions. Why? To ensure that we get legal harmonisation and legal convergence, right? We've seen for too long, and we've already heard the words from our professors in Europe and also the United States, this word of fragmentation, right? In order to create a high level of legal certainty, legal convergence and harmonisation is the best approach. So that's the second point I'd make. The third point I'd make is that there needs to be more engagement at the international and regional levels of those institutions that can assist us. One is ASEAN, which I know that they are starting to do some work on that. APEC, which is another one, but that's a little bit more political at this point in time due to the geopolitical tensions that are around and the member states that are in that. The EU, which we know the EU do some fantastic work. There are other institutions such as UNCITRAL, the United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, that are doing work in the digital trade law area, but can expand, as I understand, into investment, which could pick up some of these elements as well. UNIDROIT, which set the principles for the, trade and investment, World Bank, IMF and the BIS. Right? There's just to name a few, there's others. So I believe that we can engage those institutions as well. Why? Because I think what we need to do is we need, as the US has just pointed out over here, is set some principles, and that was only from a securities perspective. If we look at it more broadly, we need a high-level set of principles that can come down into possibly a model law that could then turn into, at a later point, a convention or treaty that sets the framework at the international level that will provide a high level of legal harmonisation and convergence. Now, you might be sitting there saying, gee, that's pie in the sky, very aspirational. You've got your head in the clouds. But these things take time. There's no better example than that than the 1980 Convention on the International Trade of Goods. It's the most prolific international convention that is used in international contract law around the world, even for those states that haven't signed up to it, such as the UK. They still use it, right? So it can work. It'll take a couple of decades, but if we don't start now, it will never get there. Okay, so coming back to the start, that's the solutions I've proposed and put forward. One of the most challenging and pressing issues that we've already heard about is this regulatory legal challenges facing the world in the evolving developments of digital finance more broadly. The area that I've been looking at and speaking with the Ripple team in Singapore now for the last few years, where I spend a lot of my time outside of Australia, is this area of tokenisation. The benefits and challenges are far from being fully understood, and we know that. And I'm looking at it not from a technology perspective, from a legal perspective, and I'll touch on that as we go through. Today, governments, regulators, policymakers around the world are grappling with how to keep pace, and we've all heard this message before, with the transformation of technology providing a pathway to digital finance products and services. Now, this story is nothing new. We've seen that in agriculture, environmental law, we've seen it in health law, we've seen it across nearly every area of the law over the last 50, 60, 100 years. Where does it start from? It starts from conversations like this. It starts from developing those first principles. The tokenisation of the economy is inextricably linked, as I've already heard, with smart contracts, some of the issues around that. And just touching on that, and the other person that spoke about antitrust, when we think about smart contracts and a couple of the points that were raised there, they're not a done deal, and far from it, from a legal perspective. And I'll come at that from the perspective of being an arbitrator. So I'll talk more about that later on, and how that the law in itself needs to be changed at the international, and in some cases, or most cases, for arbitration in the area of smart contracts to be fully operational. We know that fintech is developed over 3 stages, and there's some of the stages. So this is not new. Goes back to the mid-1800s, and we see now it all coming together and culminating over the last little period of time, over the last decade, that it really has ramped up. And for you technologists, you've been in this space a lot longer than me, and you'll know the background to that a lot better. When we think about the developments in digital finance and fintech more broadly, blockchain, social networks, NFCs, person-to-person technology, big data analytics, and further enablers, enabling all those digital finance, investment, money, payments, insurance, financial advice. Tokenomics, a new, I call it the new kid on the block. Probably not new for many of you in the room. Yet it's used to describe different aspects of the blockchain, such as the number of tokens issued and the way they are issued, the economics of consensus algorithm, and the general structure of the system in and of itself. Blockchain, we all know, there is the public blockchain, consortium blockchains, and the fully private blockchains, which most of you technologists will be well across, and how they are used. 4 categories of tokens that have emerged at the very, very high level: the FT, NFT, security tokens, and utility tokens. And I don't need to go into them any further. The other subcategories that are emerging, that are being developed and made available out there for products and services online, are infrastructure. We're seeing it in energy. We're seeing it in real estate. In UK, they're trialling this. In agriculture just recently, and I come from an agriculture primary industries background, that it's interesting that they are working very, very quickly in that area, and particularly in Australia. Fan tokens and amongst others. And this will rapidly rise over the forthcoming year or two. So some of the issues that I've come up with, and this comes out in a forthcoming publication in the cross-border area, and I will touch on smart contracts because we talk about token governance, and smart contracts are going to be interlinked with now specific token agreements that have emerged, which are a contract in and of themselves. Right? They're already out there, they're being used. They can all go onto the blockchain. Okay, we all know that. But you can take it beyond that too, right? So some of the other areas where we're seeing these agreements form and can also be put on the blockchain are cybersecurity, data governance, right? And they are also emerging. So the key areas that I've been looking at recently is tax, intellectual property, international arbitration, licensing and cybersecurity. For tax, this is problematic, right? Tax for a token-driven economy will be problematic. National governments are still grappling with it. I'm not sure where Singapore's at with this, but generally the general notion is that it's starting to be viewed as a form of property. So that appears to be the default for the experts in the tax area, that it'll be viewed as a form of property. However, as we've already probably heard, and the discussions I've had over the last couple of days, that will be very different from country to country. For example, those that have a VAT, or what we call in Australia a GST, and those countries that don't, and when a transaction takes place, how is that attributed to that? That hasn't been sorted out either. So it's very much at the early stages. It's problematic in the current general taxing of products and services across the digital economy, both nationally and transnationally. Possible ways to view this is through double taxation bilateral agreements at a nation-state level. Of digital suppliers. So some of the work that was undertaken by myself and a couple of colleagues recently was looking at this, the double bilateral agreements that countries have. Many of them have double taxation agreements, and to see whether or not that can pick up some of the issues there. Revenue recognition arising from the need to monetise value. Tax impact of legal structures. Monetisation strategies used by digital businesses and business models, and double revenue threshold mechanisms. All these areas have not been addressed. Intellectual property. So we look at patents and we look at copyright. We haven't picked up trademark in this discussion, but it's highly unlikely that a token will be patent in and of itself. What will and could form part of a patent is the authentication process, right, to protect it. In terms of copyright, code, software, causing a computer to perform a task such as to facilitate a token transaction could be afforded a level of copyright. But again, it's another unsettled area of the law. International arbitration, this will come back to the contracts issue. The rules of evidence around international arbitration and tokenisation, and particularly on the blockchain itself, There's 5 dilemmas. First is blockchain evidence itself. Is it going to be accepted or otherwise? That's far from settled. Second will be the application and the use of blockchain to submit evidence. Will that be available? Will it be accepted under the laws of evidence? And when you have a look at the laws of evidence at a national level and even at a local level, so if we come to Australia, we've got evidence laws at the national level, we've got evidence laws at the state-based level. Some of them are widely fragmented. Will they be accepted? Will it be accepted? It isn't settled. Thirdly is the rules of evidence across the common and civil law divide. They do differ. Fourth is blockchain appointed arbiters. This comes back to the contracts issue. Blockchain appointed arbiters, which is being discussed and being put forward, is where the blockchain itself will appoint the arbitrators, right? Not through an institution as it currently is and how they are, and they are supposed to be independent, and the international and national legal framework for arbitration is that an arbitrator such as myself has no influence, right? Can have no conflict of interest, must be impartial to all appointments, and you have to sign off on that. So in blockchain, setting up a process to appoint arbitrators themselves, I don't believe that that is fully settled, and I don't believe the national laws or the current international law would allow that to take place. Others may differ, have a different view on that. And 5, arbitration institutional rules will need to be revised in that regard to address these issues. Licensing, we've heard some of that licensing and the securities issues around that. Highly fragmented, nation states are adopting their own frameworks. What has emerged is it's looking like that most of this could be picked up in the banking and finance licensing areas, right? There's some of the leaders, obviously Switzerland where we are, Singapore, Japan, US, and I'll just touch on the executive order in reading and understanding that, and this comes back to the first point that I haven't made, that I am making, is that the definition of all this is not settled. So without a high-level definition for tokenisation, for blockchain settled in the law, then where's your starting point, right? And if you have a highly fragmented definition of all these things from state to state, it's great for the lawyers, it's great for people like us, right? That experts in the law or practice the law or do international arbitration. It's really good for us, right? But it doesn't address technology's issues. It doesn't address business issues, right? The EU are doing some work, as we know. The UK are certainly moving in that direction. And Australia, I think we're sort of sitting back waiting to see what everyone else is doing. I know we've done some very good work in the sandbox area through one of the through ASIC, but that's as far as it's got. I don't want to bring the politics into it, but we've had a change of government. The previous government that we're in were pushing this forward, but it seems to have taken a bit of a back seat now. Cybersecurity. Apologies. Cybersecurity on the blockchain, and there's a picture that I got just recently. It just shows you the interconnectedness here. And so what are the issues? Some of the issues are exchange scams, scam wallets, mining scams, fraudulent token investment apps and websites. We're all seeing them emerge, and pump and dump schemes, which will be problematic, and it's no different to hedge funds and the current stock market out there, where people promote a particular token, pump up its price, and then drop it out the other end and take the profits. And that's it. So thank you for that. And while I did reverse that, I hopefully some of those solutions might get people talking and bringing teams of people together to push these forward. Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Robert. That was very rich. Sorry, please. I mean, just maybe while the audience are kind of thinking up questions, I've got one. I mean, so if I understand your sort of deep point is that fragmentation globally is the challenge and we need a solution to it. You say that Australia is sort of sitting back and waiting for the UK to make the first move. In the UK, people are sitting back and waiting for Australia to make the first move. So how can this be coordinated? Is it just through international organizations? Is it just this endless process of international policy work, which takes forever, having been part of it? Or is there some way of, in Brussels, everyone talks about the Brussels effect, where they go first with a big regulation, everyone copies it. Is that likely to happen, or do you think it is the sort of international diplomacy, or is there some other way of getting to that unfragmented state?
Yeah, look, it's a very good question you ask, and it's a highly complex question to even address here. But I think some of that starts with our work here as researchers, most definitely. And in some recent work I did for the Australian government just on this issue, not so much on tokens, but other areas of technology in India, was precisely that, engaging the policymakers must engage the technologists. The lawyers and legal profession must engage the technologists. You people need to inform us. You need to engage us, right? You're the experts out there in the technology space. We can't get across it all. It's hard enough to be across the law, right? And the detail of the law without having that background in there. So that's the starting point. The second point is that country to country collaboration. So, for example, I was just talking to my counterpart earlier this morning in Portugal, and they're going to talk about they're arranging a regulatory a convened lab. Right? Thank you for that word. So those ideas are very much on the table and need to be taken up. But again, in that regulatory lab, we need the technologists with us, right, to inform us. And then the third component of that is our job. As part of our job, we need to engage government. And we need to engage our regional institutions such as ASEAN, right, such as those other organisations up in this part of the world. And not so much having to go out and be a lobby group, because that's not what we do. But we can engage government and get government to these forums as well. And I think that is another starting point. And, I'll just touch on, last week I was at Cambridge University, delivered the exact same presentation to government officials on financial issues from around the world. And it was made up of people from government, law enforcement, finance sector, academics, and so on and so on. And we found that those people are now going away and talking to their people and getting regulators to the table. So we need to engage them in the process.
So, I mean, that was one of your solutions, was sort of defragmenting the international system. I mean, the other one you mentioned was licensing, which is obviously national. Is there any way of bringing them together? So obviously in the traditional financial sector, we have equivalence decisions where one jurisdiction just says that they recognize the equivalence of another jurisdiction and allows that to happen. Do you ever see that happening in the token economy?
Put it bluntly, no. Why? Because each country has its own sovereign needs when it comes to these issues as well. And so their licensing frameworks are long-standing. They'll take time to get that reform. But I'll come back to my first point, where I said one of the solutions of this is to develop high-level principles of what you, industry, need. Right? Think about this. Go away and think about what are the half dozen, right? And hats off to Singapore, they do this very, very well. And Australia work with Singapore, and we are working in this area as well in other spaces. What are the half dozen high-level principles that you need, that you think you need, to guide regulation going forward? For example, is democratic values one? Right? Is culture another? okay? Is linguistics another? I'm just rattling off my mind here with some of the work I did in India. Thank you. Thank you.